Hey everybody, this is Everyday Commentary. This is another video in the Is It Better Than a Sebenza series, and today I am going to compare the Sebenza to the Giant Mouse Riv, or Giant Mouse ACE Riv. The ACE line of Giant Mouse, let's talk about this knife a little bit. The ACE line of Giant Mouse is their production line. It is not their limited edition line. The first knife in this line was the ACE Biblio, and the second was, I think, the ACE Riv, but I'm not 100% sure. They have a bunch of knives now. All of the knives from Giant Mouse are collaboration designs between Jens Ansu and Jesper Foxnes, and I really like their design language. It just kills me to see their new knives. They're just all so good. This knife reminds me in a lot of ways of a Ansu custom that I owned and wasn't a fan of, called the Orso. This has a similar setup with the blade and the flipper tab. It's just smaller than the Orso. And that Orso was a really cool knife. It had a weird detent thing that it was totally fine. It was well made. I just didn't like the detent, so I sent it back. This knife is well under 3 inches. In fact, I think the blade is like 2.25 inches. I think that the blade length is probably a little bit longer, 2.5 inches. But this is a really compact knife. It is a very small knife in your pocket. It's basically the size of a dragonfly, but it carries much, much better. As you can see, I've owned this knife for a long time. This was like the typical micarta that you see. This is all, pocket use, giving this the nice shiny color. But this is a knife I've owned for a while and used a lot. I like this knife a lot. It carries super well. It runs LMAX steel. It is relatively tall and super thin behind the edge. I think this knife is a great slicer. The spine is crowned. This is a really, really nice little compact knife. Now, let's talk about it in comparison to the Sebenza. Again, this is a Sebenza 31 with S45 VN steel. It's relatively new. This is significantly older. So I think that one thing you're going to notice right away is that there are a lot of nice touches on both knives. Like, for example, the Sebenza was one of the very first production knives that had a crowned spine, meaning a rounded over spine. And the ACE Riv also has a crowned rounded over spine. Great, great, great spine. The other thing that you'll notice is that the jimping pattern on these two knives is very similar. Very, very similar. The run of jimping on the ACE is up in front, and I think it's designed to promote cuts like this, and whereas the jimping on the Sebenza is in the typical spot. So super cool there. Another thing that's very similar to the knives is that the stone washing on both knives is pretty high quality. This is a little shinier than the stone washing on the Sebenza, and Sebenza is more likely to hide scratches, but very, very similar degree and kind of stone washing, both of which I like a lot. The other thing that I would point out that's similar is the pocket clips. They sit at a similar angle, and the pocket clips sitting at that angle kind of puts them out of the way of your hand. Like here, you can see that, like, when I close this knife in my hand, the pocket clip rides right in this little cavity where my fingers and my palm meet. In a similar way, the Sebenza also hits right in that same spot. Very, very good placement, and I think that it may have been accidental, but when you are engaged in good design and you're designing for the human hand, you're going to have some accidental similarities. Really, really interesting things that have shown up in comparing these two knives. Now, this knife is like $200. It runs LMAX steel, which is not that much different than S45 VN. I mean, they're obviously significantly different chemical-wise, but in terms of their stain resistance and their edge retention and their toughness, whatever. It's like angels on the head of a pin. I always think that with steel. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, I guess it's different, but like, what's the big difference? The blade stock thickness is almost exactly the same. But I do think that the Riv ends up being a slightly better slicer because the blade is significantly taller than the blade on the Sebenza. Like, that's belly to belly, and you can see that there's probably a third of the Riv still to go, meaning that you're going to get a much more slicey edge. The Sebenza is not designed to be a slicer. It's designed to be an all-around knife, and so it has to have a more robust edge, but that means that the Riv is just going to be a little bit better at slicing stuff. I've used this knife for food prep, cutting sourposata. Both of them are pretty good at that. I mean, everything can cut sourposata. The real thing is like splitting an apple. Unfortunately, the Riv is not long enough to do that, to cut an apple cleanly. The Sebenza can do that all day. And so let's talk about which one I like better. I actually think these are really, really close. This has been the closest comparison so far. But I do think that given that they're roughly the same weight, and you know, I would assume because of the height on the Riv that the volume difference between these two is almost negligible, because the Sebenza is a little bit narrower. I would prefer the Sebenza because you get a little bit more blade in a package that is a little bit longer but a little bit thinner at the same time. So, you know, that's a big deal. And, you know, I'm not a fan of always having a small blade. I do prefer small blades, but I prefer them because you tend to get a more compact carry. If you can get a compact carry with a big blade, like the Sebenza, that's a big plus. So in the end, I think that even though the Riv is a little bit cheaper and a little bit slicier, I prefer the Sebenza. And it is an exceptionally close call, which tells you this is a great knife. So like if you want a compact knife and you can't find the Dragonfly and ZDP 189, I would just go get this knife. You will not be disappointed. I would probably, if I had to do it over again, I'd probably get it in all titanium, even though the all titanium is a little bit heavier. But I do like the micarta too. So that was the latest. So far, the only one that's lost out to the Sebenza, other than that intro video, was the Dauntless is the only one that's beat the Sebenza. And I think it's just a sign of how good this knife is. It's a really refined knife. It's been around for 31 years. It was designed by a master, and it's made by a bunch of master craftsmen. So it's not surprising that it's doing so well. Talk to everybody later.